We're only as rich as our poorest neighbor. Many of our rural communities are struggling. 17 of them are in the bottom 10% in the entire United States in unemployment, in income, and in poverty.
It's incredibly important to us that our rural communities be strong.
How are we able to tie this all together so that it can truly raise the water level?
The Rural Task Force is a cross-section of individuals from across the state, including legislators, local government officials, economic development, business people, farmers even, to come in and sit down and just have a discussion about what can we do to pull all of Tennessee in the correct direction.
The majority of our state is classified as rural, and so we want to have a seat at the table to be able to talk about ways that we can grow our economies.
We had people from Mountain City to Memphis. It created an environment for people to think and for people to throw out ideas and literally start with a blank sheet of paper up on the wall and say, okay, where do we go from here? And that was really inspiring.
If it's a state or a federal program, you can take $1 million and put in Chicago, Illinois, and you're really not going to change somebody's lives. If you put $1 million in one of these programs into a rural area, social economically, you can change people's lives.
You know, success is a few things. It is leadership, it's people, and it's funding. And that this program, this project, brings it all together.
You know, there's the old cliche that success is not a destination, it's a journey, and that's exactly what we are on.
What we're hoping to achieve from the Rural Task Force is not just the key metric that we've set out, which is having 0 distressed counties in the state of Tennessee. We're also aspiring to a rural renaissance in which every community shares in the success equally.
It's a continuous journey for us to improve those communities we all love and call home.
This was not something that was created just to check a box and say, well, we did that. This was something that was created to try to find smart, learned ideas to make a difference.
Good morning, Team Tennessee. As you heard in the video there, you heard Commissioner Templeton say that this is not a destination, that this is definitely a journey, and it is an honor today to introduce or to bring up to up on the stage the leaders behind this rural renaissance, this journey that we've been on for the past year. Since I stood right there last year and we talked about the creation of this, and today we're excited to provide an update. So if we will, we'll bring up on the stage Commissioner Jay Templeton from the Department of Agriculture. Commissioner Kevin Triplett from the Department of Tourist Development. And Commissioner Randy Boyd from the Department of Economic and Community Development. Okay, so first we're going to start out, we're going to let Commissioner Boyd kick this off by talking about the process behind the Rural Task Force and the reason that we started the task force.
Thanks, Amy. And this process was, I think, unique and inspiring, one that was different than other task force and other committees that I've ever been on. So we talk a lot about it takes all 6.6 million Tennesseans to affect change, and if we work together, we can accomplish anything. The problem is sometimes when you announce a particular issue and you try to rally support, not all 6.6 million people want to join you. In fact, a lot of times when you announce a committee or a task force and you look around the room, eyes start going down and arms get really short and nobody makes eye contact with you. This one was different. So first off, we decided to put together a task force of people, not just from the state government, because this isn't just a state government issue, this is an all Tennessee issue. So we started off with leaders from the cabinet, with Department of Labor, obviously tourism and agriculture, higher education, and other key stakeholders within state government. But then we also reached out to partners at TVA, the Farm Bureau, Community Bankers Association. So we had this broad group of 18 different people, legislators like Dolores Gresham and Brian Williams in Cookeville, put together the task force and made the announcement that we're going to start working on this. And it was amazing. In the first week, we got over 200 letters from all over the state saying, why are you excluding us? And we should be in there too. And by the way, all those people are from Nashville. They don't know anything about rural. And I kind of hold out that Julius Johnson knew a little bit about agriculture and rural communities. But nonetheless, it was great to just see this overwhelming interest in being a part. So the process was simple. We got all the people together that had statewide organizations, mapped out all the things we're already doing, and then came up with a vision, a target. And the target was by the year 2025 to have 0 distressed counties. But the idea is if we can lift those counties up, using those same policies, all boats will rise. And that was our goal. Then we started our listening sessions. And we had all those people that wrote us, anybody from around the state was able to come into the task force and make presentations. I think we spent about 3 or 4 months doing that, getting all kinds of great ideas. And then we divided all those ideas up into 6 different groups, put together committees, probably on average about 20 people per committee, to analyze them and actually come up with real policy ideas, policies that not only we thought were significant and transformational, but that actually had key performance measures. So it wasn't just things we would do, we would know what success looked like. And we knew what the fiscal cost was going to be. So we actually created policies that we could actually present to the governor and say, these things are measurable and we know what they're going to cost. So we'll have a menu of things to choose from. Before we go further though, can I have everybody that actually participated in the task force stand up? I know a lot of people in the room. Would you mind doing that? Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so I want to go to Commissioner Triplett now to talk about the 6 subcommittees and the involvement, who was involved in the process.
It was really well spread out, as you saw by some of the people who just stood up, and that was one of the focuses and the function of this was to have people not only from state government, but local governments, city mayors, county mayors. We had folks from the private sector, banks and different entities that work with our rural partners. We had nonprofits. It was a broad spectrum of more than 100 people to work on subcommittees like conservation and tourism and agritourism, to work on education and health, to work on small business entrepreneurship, and the sections and subsections of topics that affect our rural areas. And it was important when you look at the broad spectrum, it all ties in together. And so what we found out very early on were all the subcommittees tied in together as well. A lot of the topics that each subcommittee would talk about, whether it was education or health or tourism or whatever, it was uncanny how often a lot of those topics overlapped because our issues overlap. To have a good workforce, you want a healthy workforce, you want an educated workforce. To attract business, you want quality of life and tourism. You want things for people to do. So as we went through the process and talking about each topic, each section of the state had the same discussion topics. It might be a little bit different here and there from east to west, but the issues were the same. And it was phenomenal from the very beginning, the first 3 or 4 months of hearing people come in and give testimonies of projects they were working on and things that worked and things that didn't work. That led us to identifying and being able to identify these 6 subcommittees and look at broad topics. And it was really not only an amazing process to have those discussions, but to see how much of the common thought went through everything. And when we wound up putting things literally on blank pieces of paper, at how many dots were connected. And everybody in this room who represents those areas, whether you're in a county or a town or the next county over, all those dots connect. And so it was good for us. And the process from the subcommittees of having these ideas and actually having, for lack of a better term, the boots on the ground of the people who deal with these issues every single day, talk about the challenges but also the successes, and it was pretty inspiring.
So I was actually going to do a test to see who could name the subcommittees the quickest. the 6 subcommittees.
To me,
But-
I have found through the process, it's like you know, the 7 of anything. I'll leave one out. I remember them, and we promote
to put you
7
on the
genres.
spot.
We promote 7 genres of music in Tennessee, and I always forget one. So anyway, so ask Commissioner Templeton what they are. So.
I commonly forget what's the number 1 commodity in the state. I always name the number 2, and then that group
might be
brings
the
it to my
department's
attention.
name, I'm not sure. Okay, so actually, Commissioner Templeton, I wanted to ask you about how you felt the Rural Task Force process changed the typical operation of state agencies, or how we interact with our partner agencies at both the federal and the local government.
Sure. Yeah, I think Randy and Kevin have hit on it, and you all know, or else you would not be here. All that we do is about relationships. It's about what the other person does, how what we do, we can commingle resources to reach a common goal. You know, in the Department of Agriculture, for example, one of the things that we're doing, we are completely looking at everything we do in our division of marketing, how it relates to market development, how it relates to food manufacturers, for example, even on our regulatory side. We're taking another look how we interact with those folks. One of the great things I think came out of this process as we sat around the table and the different groups talked, oftentimes I have been asked, and my predecessor, Julius Johnson, was asked, you know, why is agriculture, the department, so interested in rural development? Well, 90% of all of our farm families in Tennessee have all farm income. So the stronger the rural communities are, the stronger our agriculture industry is in Tennessee. But we've been able to hear things through ECD, through tourism, through USDA rural development, that programs that we were familiar with but had not fully engaged in. And likewise, we have some things that are going on in wellness and healthy food, for example, that we really haven't developed the way we ought to have had in the Department of Agriculture. So it's forced us to rethink how we go about business, even to the point, most of you I'm sure are familiar with Governor Haslam's customer-focused government initiative, when each of us as department leaders every year put forth a plan for our department that we're held accountable to Governor Haslam, our boss. And we've incorporated many of these things at the Department of Agriculture in the CFG planning for the coming year. But really beyond all of that we have come forth with through our department has been opportunities to work with private industry. We have found those partners that are willing to put their capital at risk, maybe for many different reasons. They need us in government to give a bit of stability or a bit of credibility. And I think in many ways, as we've gone about that and done that over the years, you're going to see an increased effort among state government in how we interact with our federal partners, but more importantly, with how we interact with our private partners.
Okay, so you actually answered one of the questions I had next, is what's been the biggest surprise out of this process, or what has been like one of the biggest opportunities that you have seen come out of this with the task force? I think I just threw a question in.
When you go back and you look at the people that stood up around the room that Randy introduced to you, I wish all of you could have participated, and in many ways I think all of you did. But the energy, the effort, the enthusiasm that went in, not just the task force, but more importantly, that committee structure that came across from Tennessee. You know, I'm 2.5 hours away from Nashville, had served in local capacities. I understand the commitment it takes to get to Nashville, Tennessee to participate in a meeting. We had people from Memphis, from Northeast Tennessee, far Northeast Tennessee, Southeast Tennessee that committed days out of the summer to come and have these kind of discussions. And that's the opportunity. Again, you know, I'm going to go back to what we're focusing on in agriculture. We have a private partner that has secured through many means nationwide tens of millions of dollars of private capital that could be brought back for innovation type projects in Tennessee, and that's going to become our focus. That's the big opportunity that I see in agriculture, and I think whether it's economic community development or tourism, I'm not going to speak for these guys, but I think we all see those new opportunities that have been provided to us.
I think there were a couple of things. First, the word relationships was mentioned a minute ago, and it helped develop a lot of those, but communication is critical to getting anything done. And so talking about a lot of those and just actually sitting down and discussing challenges and issues, but learning ourselves of other programs that existed in other departments. We realized, even though we communicate a lot, we talk interdepartmentally, but to sit in a room and actually discuss different projects and say, we can find a way to tie that in. It was an amazing process to learn some of the things that were already going on that together we could make even bigger to benefit, that really, at that point, those particular topics didn't even need the Rural Task Force. We just needed to come together and communicate and talk about some things we could already do. So I think the awareness of opportunity was the biggest thing.
I would say that one, it was affirming that you imagine people would be passionate and determined about this issue, and they were. So that wasn't really a surprise. But as you asked the question, I'm reflecting on some other groups that I've been involved in. I've been working on higher education things, like talking to people in Washington, D.C. about the Tennessee Promise. And we'll go up there and you get leaders from all over the country come wanting to learn about how Tennessee is doing what we're doing. Usually within the first 30 minutes, it devolves into hand-wringing and finger-pointing and why the government isn't giving us money. And if somebody would just give us money and do this for us, everything would be okay, but it's always somebody else's fault. But it was different in Tennessee. Everybody came together, and there was none of that. Everybody just had this can-do attitude. Let's work together and get it done. It's just so inspiring to be with that group of people. It was a really inspiring group. I will say, just to echo what Kevin said, and that may be answering a question that you already had in the future, but of all the different items that we came up with, there were a lot of them, maybe up to a third of them, that we could just do now. You know, not everything needs money, not everything needs legislation. It was just Kevin and I, or Jay and I saying, hey, we've got the resources already. Let's just go do that. So there's about a third of the things that we can already go do. There's a third of the things that we probably aren't going to need either legislation or money to help get initiated. So that's the next big step. But then in addition, there's another third of things that we probably need to do some more research on. But the important thing was we could do stuff now. We don't have to wait on a lot of that. And just making those connections, I think, showed us that that was possible.
Okay, would you like to talk about some of those recommendations that we're able to actually just go ahead and do now, either in partnership or just within our departments?
I'll do one, and you guys, we'll take turns. I'll do one. One was asset mapping and helping our communities determine first what assets they have to help them build a strategy going forward. So in a lot of cases, in a lot of our smaller communities, we have a lot of people that have great passion for the community, but maybe not a lot of experience in developing economic development strategies. And I can't even say after a year and a half in this that I would be any good at that either. But there are experts that we can bring to the table, to bring to these communities to help them determine not only what their assets are today, but then what their strategy should be to maximize their economic development over the next 5 years. And so we're able to put together a team to go ahead and do that for our communities, to start creating a plan. And that was something we had the resources to do immediately.
That's good.
You know, one of the things that came forth, healthy food initiative out of the Ag and Small Business Committee, as well as the Health Committee of the task force. I think we at the department have done really well over the past 30 years with a program that I hope many of you are familiar with, Pick Tennessee Products. But one of the things, while we've done really well promoting those products and finding out who the producers are and giving them the kind of advertising support that they need, we have not done a very good job delivering those products to some areas that are in sore need of healthy and fresh foods. So that's one of the things with existing resources that we're doing. We may not get there without some monetary assistance, but we are at least going to develop the plan, see what opportunities there are with some federal partners as well as private partners to not only answer that concern in rural Tennessee, but to further answer the concern in urban Tennessee, where those type of products have not been made readily available over a number of years in sort of food desert type areas.
Another one was, and this goes back to communication, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think the the thought process was the same in those first few meetings where we were hearing from so many different people, and the light bulb was going off of, wow, I didn't know that. You all have probably heard us say several times when you are honored enough or have the opportunity to accept one of these positions, there's not a huge handbook that comes with it. And the same for when you're elected to city mayor or county commission. Sometimes there's not a playbook that goes with it. So knowing what's available and knowing the opportunities that are out there where we can either through the state level, or as Jay said, from some federal assistance, or even together as a group, so there's a process that will be put in place to, for lack of a better term, a clearinghouse or an education process to help make people aware of what's available and what can be done. And this structure or this grant or this process will help with that, because it's certainly been a learning process for us. And the awareness it is for everybody. When you take over one of these public service positions, you get a lot of people who say good luck, and so talking together and learning what opportunities are out there and best practices and things is a process that can be put in place. Now, it may need a little bit of financial assistance, but it's something that can be done now. And we learned a lot of that as we were talking about different issues and different things we were dealing with. That we talk a lot, and Commissioner Boyd, we talk about the 3 grand divisions. It's what's referred to in the state constitution. It's why there's 3 stars on the hat. Commissioner Boyd actually uses the term 3 grand alliances, and coming together. And even though East and West may be 400 and 500 miles apart, the issues are still the same. So what's out there that we can do now that's available that we may not be aware of because we just got elected to this position or named to this position? And hopefully this is part of that process.
And that's actually one of my favorite things, the website, the online toolkit, best practices. But you have another one?
No, I'm
share?
going to disrupt your plan.
Oh,
and I'm going to
okay.
ask you a question.
Oh, no.
So I want
You're
to
gonna
be
put me
clear,
on
and I
the
think
spot.
most everybody knows this, but in case there's just anybody under some false impression. So these guys are maybe different. I'm not going to speak for you, but as Commissioner of Economic Development, I'm the guy that talks about all the great things we do in economic development. But to be clear, I don't actually do any of the great things in economic development. The people that actually do the things.
Okay, I wasn't going to tell anybody what we did, so that's right.
But the people that do things are like Amy New. And so when we're in this task force, Amy and her assistant Amanda Martin were the ones that organized and steered and encouraged, and some of the best innovative ideas came from them. So I'd like to ask you, of some of the things that we're going to do now, what are some of your, maybe you mention a couple of your favorites.
So one in particular, and is Amanda, I would like for her to stand up, actually. Where is she? She's probably, oh, there,
There she is.
Amanda,
give her a round of
everybody,
applause.
seriously. She has been the leader behind so much of this and pushed it, and sometimes pushed me to go even harder than I can. But I think probably my favorite would be the asset-based planning, as well as the joint economic community development boards, and going through and making sure that and I see a lot of heads nodding or shaking, making sure that we get the most out of those boards, that we're not just coming together quarterly and sitting down and having coffee and donuts, that we're actually sitting together and we're talking about things that are happening in our community, or bringing the right people to the table, people from our education sector, people from that local industry, from the health department, bringing them in and talking about what all's going on and what types of grants are available as well to either partner together and go after. But also the Retail Academy is another one that is exciting. And also my team in here, it's all about, my team has been wonderful. And when you see them around here, please thank them for everything that they do. But I see a couple of them smiling. Go ahead. Oh, next question. Sorry. You threw me off. Gosh, guys. You can't throw the wrench in it like that. Okay, so what do you feel like is, actually, so we talked about recommendations that we're doing now. What are some of your favorite recommendations that we will be putting before the legislature and also creating in the next year?
I'll start us off. So we're going to build on some of the things we've already done. The site development grants, we talked a lot about that yesterday. That is incredibly impactful and important, and it's something that we need to continue to do. We're in the process now of taking applications for the next round of site development grants, another $6 million. In our request, we have $10 million in for next year. We need to continue to develop our sites for all of Tennessee. So that's a big one. Again, not new, but just more of something that we already know that works. Another thing that we did last year, and again, are doing now, is grants for tourism. We worked with our partners in the Department of Tourism to help develop assets. We talked about that yesterday morning. We want to continue to do that. This coming year, we're going to have all those programs run through the Department of Tourism, which is the natural place for that to operate. But continue to do tourism grants to help you develop your assets. So that's important. We talked about this past year, we did these entrepreneurship grants where communities could develop entrepreneur centers in their community. We're going to do that again. So those three things are just more of the same, but more of things that really, really worked last year. One thing that's new that I thought was really innovative is trying to duplicate or triplicate what the CO is doing in Jackson, Tennessee. So in Jackson, Tennessee, I think maybe the bus may be out there still. It was out there yesterday. The CO in Jackson created a big bus that they could take STEM training, entrepreneurial classes, small business workshop classes out to smaller towns. So if you got a town of 1,000 people or 2,000 people, even those entrepreneurship grants are probably too much. But they still need these type of services. So what the CO did, they put it all on a bus that travels around their area and provide those services to the smaller communities. Wouldn't it be great to be able to do that in all the Grand Alliance, in each one of the areas? So we've got a request in to buy 3 new buses and be able to offer this programming all across the state. Stop with that.
You know, I think innovation, asset management, what I think Kevin's going to speak to you about here in just a second, support all of those things. We have an opportunity in Tennessee to really be known as an entrepreneurship and an innovation capital of the country, particularly in agriculture, but it's beyond agriculture. It's involved all those things that Launch Tennessee is involved in, the CO out of Jackson. You know, I can't get away from, and I don't want to talk about my part of the state to you very much, but over my lifetime, there were 2 companies in McNairy County, Tennessee that forever changed our part of the world down there. Due to other circumstances, after many successful years, retirements and change of ownership, those things sort of went away. But both of them were formed by local people who were innovative, who were entrepreneurship in their mind, entrepreneur in the, well, what's my word, Randy? It's not entrepreneurship, good business people, thank you, that really developed and put people to work in Southwest Tennessee that made a difference. I'm talking about for 40 years made a difference in our community. And you know, I've been there where you all are, have always wanted to bring that one in and land it because that's big, that's what gets us in the newspaper. But ladies and gentlemen, the people that are going to change our rural communities are already there. I really do believe that. And it's ag innovation, business innovation. That's the focus and that's the excitement that I have for our rural communities.
I actually was preparing some remarks the other day to speak, and I typed in entrepreneurship, and I misspelled it so bad it didn't even have a suggestion as to what.
It's a big word.
Yeah, I looked over here, and I thought, I would just give it a shot, and it would tell me, and it didn't even know what I was trying to type. So I think I went with creating business. Is what I. So there's a couple of things. It's hard to nail that. You know, it's like naming your favorite barbecue place or your favorite Elvis song. It's really hard when there were so many good ideas that came out of this. But there are a couple that we're working closely with in the tourism department. One is similar to what Commissioner Boyd mentioned about the tourism infrastructure grants, and that came out of a program that you announced here last year that a lot of people, in some counties, their number one asset is a tourism asset. It's a natural resource, or it's something you're doing with a festival, but you don't have the resources to build it, and that's where the infrastructure grants came from. So there's a concept on the table that came out of this committee of a similar situation for marketing grants to promote tourism assets. but also to develop tourism assets that exist now that maybe aren't getting that marketing development that's necessary. The second one ties into what Commissioner Templeton was talking about entrepreneurship, that we do a lot of stuff here in Tennessee, and we make a lot of stuff here in Tennessee, not just cars and really big things. I mean, we're very entrepreneurial, if that's a word. We make some incredible stuff. I mean, all the way down to folks in very, very small rooms creating some of the best chocolate you've ever eaten, and so there's a program, and hopefully you all are familiar with it because we've spent probably close to $20 million over the last 3 years promoting the Soundtrack of America Made in Tennessee. But you take Soundtrack of America off of that, and Made in Tennessee is a very important part of that. Made in Tennessee. And we make a lot of really good things here. And so we want to marry those two and work on a program where we promote, from automobiles to chocolate, what's made in Tennessee. Because I think a lot of people would be very surprised that a lot of products they use and enjoy come from Tennessee. And so and a lot of them from our rural areas. So anyway.
Okay, so you have, go ahead.
I don't want to pile on because we didn't talk about some of the ones that I think are some of the most critical.
It's hard to get them all in there. We
I
have
know,
a bunch.
but
just an hour.
There's a huge omission, as we talked about last conference, this conference. You know, education is the inflection of economic development, and we obviously didn't ignore educational initiatives. I know, unfortunately, we don't have anybody from the Department of Education up on the stage with us, but they were an integral part of the task force. They had a lot of really good ideas. Here's three. One was a rural education network. And this is very low cost, but what this was an effort to bring educators from around rural Tennessee together to share best practices. Now, that doesn't sound revolutionary, but I found in my work in economic development and before in education, usually you don't have to invent new things. The great ideas are already out there. It's just about sharing them and scaling them. And so the idea was to get all these people across the state that already have great ideas together and have them share those ideas. And so there'll be a coordinator, a couple of conventions a year, websites that help them collaborate, but that was one that's low cost and we will be able to do. A second thing, some of our rural communities have a challenge, maybe getting educators, maybe some of the best and brightest, to come to their communities. And so another idea was to provide stipends that would allow us to give extra incentives for educators to come to the rural communities. So if you're in a community that's having a hard time recruiting top talent in education, this would be some extra funds that you would be available to you to recruit those educators. And then lastly, not lastly, but a third one of the things we talked about a little bit yesterday was Manufacturing Day, getting kids into factories so they can learn what work is about. It's interesting to get them into the factory to see what work's about, but unfortunately many of them actually never work. We hear this all the time, and everybody in the room I know that works in economic development or has a business hears this all the time. Employers are constantly saying the workers that come to us, or the students that come to us today, don't have soft skills. And what they mean by that is they don't know what it means to show up on time. They don't know what it means to dress for work, how to work in teams, basic things that you learn in work. Well, here's an interesting stat. 15 years ago, 48% of all kids graduating from either high school or college had some kind of work experience. Today, only 24% do, only half as many. The problem is, and I'm guilty as a parent myself, we enable our children to not go to work. We say, you know, your job is just to go to school. It's not to work. We don't want you to worry about that. And I think we're doing them a disservice. So a lot of these kids are coming out of college or out of high school with absolutely no work experience. They have no idea what it means to work. So in the task force, we also put in a request for $1 million to run through 3-Star, as this is in addition to the things we talked about yesterday, but an additional $1 million for work-based learning grants for our communities. And it would be competitive up to $25,000, 40 grants for you and your community to come up with a work-based learning program, an internship, an apprenticeship, some way to get kids into the workplace. And so I think that's also one that I'm really excited about.
The best practices for teachers. I come from a family of teachers, and that was one of the ones that really could be done because it's, you know, it's happening already. Some of our most creative ideas from an education standpoint are coming from our teachers in rural areas because either, you know, less funding or whatever. So the idea of getting them together and share ideas of things, and even not only from a knowledge standpoint, but a morale standpoint. So they know they're not dealing with these issues by themselves. They're dealing with same issues that teachers from other areas are, but they're doing some really incredible things for these students. So to come up with a system to open up an avenue for them to talk was a really exciting part of this process.
I think, you know, the incentives to get the qualified teachers, we have suffered, and I'm sure many of you all have the same issue, particularly advanced math, science, those type of accredited certified teachers to get into particularly the high schools. And I'm really hoping that as we go forth and further develop in education, the incentive program to entice those type of certifications back to our rural communities, I think can have a tremendous benefit as we continually prepare our students for college and higher education.
Okay, so I was going to talk about next steps, but rather we're going to switch it again. It's always good to be flexible. We're going to go ahead and take some questions from the audience and then wrap it up with next steps and then how everyone in this room can be part of the Rural Task Force Team Tennessee movement. But I think Carly and Caitlin have microphones and we'll be walking around. Does anyone have questions for the co-chairs? Yes, ma'am. I think here comes Caitlin.
When the private sector can't provide or doesn't provide, the public sector needs to step in. And a huge issue for us in beautiful Hickman County is access to rural internet. What are you all doing to help us with that?
Okay. I guess I should take that. So
Yeah, you start. You got that one.
So thank you for that. And I don't know if you were here yesterday in the morning, but we did talk about that a little bit. First off, I agree with you 100%. And
We all do.
Yeah, I don't think there's any disagreement whatsoever, and the governor does. I can say that with authority. We recognize that for us to be successful in our rural communities, you have to be connected. I actually had the pleasure of getting to visit with Senator Frist Monday afternoon for a bit, and we were talking about rural health. He's got a passion around rural health, and I just want to brainstorm with him. And within 10 minutes, we were talking about broadband and his solution for help provide better health care in our rural communities is telemedicine. Catch is, if you don't have broadband, you can't deliver it. So it's critical from his perspective to deliver health to our healthcare to our rural communities. But in education, we've talked about online access is critical for a lot of new programming. I was in Greene County not too long ago, and they have a program there where they have a Chinese teacher providing Chinese lessons to students in Hancock County. There's no way you can have a Chinese teacher in Hancock County teaching Chinese, but via the broadband and internet, they can do that. So there's so many things you can do around education. From a business perspective, if you're not connected, I can speak as a business person, I just can't imagine how you would function today without being connected. And so from business, from education, from health, it's critical. So yes, say that we understand it's a critical issue. So what are we going to do? So our department commissioned a report that it's about 70 pages. You can go online and get it. It defines the problem. One thing I found last year, actually when I first started this job in January of 2015, we did listening sessions all across the state. Every single one of the listening sessions, the most important thing, if not sometimes like 75% of the conversation was around broadband. But then when I come back to Nashville and I find everybody's banding about different solutions, but nobody had actually defined the problem. If you ask 5 people what they thought the definition of broadband was, you get 5 different answers. So we needed a definition of broadband. The second thing was nobody really knew what the penetration level was. How you can solve a problem if you don't know how big the problem is. The third thing nobody talked about was what was the cost. Everybody had these solutions, but you say, well, what's the cost? Nobody knew. So we set out to answer those three things, and this is in the report, but here's the quick answers to those three things. One, the definition we agreed to, and there's always going to be debatable, but you need to come up with one that most people can agree on. The FCC recommended 25 down, 3 megabits per second up. And so we agreed on that, and that's, I think, a reasonable standard. You can always say everybody should have a gig, but this is a reasonable standard. And the second thing was we looked at what the penetration level was. It was, and I apologize for those that were here yesterday morning, but I repeat this. It was 13% of our population that didn't have broadband. And the challenge there was, though, that while it's 13% on average across the state, 2% of the people in our cities don't have it. 34% of our people in our rural communities don't have it. Again, accentuating this digital divide that we have. So I thought that was a really important insight. And lastly, and I don't think I mentioned this yesterday, but the cost. We actually costed it out. If you provided broadband to each one of those people, the cost is between $500 million and $1.7 billion. So obviously that's not something that the government can write a check for, but between the state, between the local communities, between all the other private providers, all together over a period of time, and with some new advances in technology, we can bridge it. But the one thing that was extra, we did ask our consultants to share with us best practices across the state, across the country. And it turns out Tennessee is not the only state with this issue. Every other state's facing the same issue. And a lot of them have come up with some really interesting ideas. And so in the report, we've got over 30 different ideas that we can, we published that. We're not gonna do all of them, and we certainly, there may be some that we can't do, but I think there's enough in there that we can all come together and agree on certain things. I was disappointed, amongst friends, I'll say this, I was disappointed when we released the report. There were a few people that got the report. There's 30 different things, many of which were obvious things that they would like, and then immediately find the one thing they disagreed about and complain about that. Surely there's gonna be some things in there that we're not gonna be happy with, but there's enough things in there that we can come together on to create a win-win, and I'm confident, I was gonna say hopeful, I'm confident that we're gonna be able to come up with some combination of those solutions to present next year that we can make a significant progress next year.
I think everyone is aware that it's as much a part of infrastructure now as power and sewer and water and everything else. I mean, connectivity is just now part of that element. It affects agriculture, it affects economic development, it affects tourism, it affects health, it affects education. It is part of the infrastructure. And if you don't have it, you're behind the curve. And so we know that it was throughout this whole process, the number of topics that came up that were really good ideas but needed connectivity. So it is large enough to be a separate issue itself that a lot of people are working on, because it's, we're winning a lot of awards from an economic standpoint, from a tourism standpoint, but to stay in that category, we have to be able to compete in all areas, and that's one area.
We have participated on the task force with Randy's group, a couple of our folks from the department. Connectivity, huge issue in agriculture from the business standpoint of agritourism ventures. Today with advanced technology and farm equipment, obviously is operating in very rural parts of the state. It is many times not fully functional because of that connectivity issue. The problem has been identified. I think we're all in agreement with that. It is just as Randy and Kevin mentioned, bringing the folks together who can make the provision for us and providing that leadership to them from a governmental standpoint to move this thing forward. And I think Governor Haslam is prepared to do that as he listens to the different folks that are involved in it. And Randy has been a tremendous leader on this, but just getting the report out and creating the discussion. So I'm hopeful for a really forward plan to come forth in the next few months.
But while we're doing that, we're trying to look at issues that maybe we can help with today. Like you mentioned beautiful Hickman County, and you mentioned the word access, and you were talking about connectivity and internet. But one of the areas from a tourism standpoint, we're trying to help with beautiful Hickman County and access is you have 73 miles of the Duck River, and you have one place to put in a canoe, one. Now, I'm not great at math, but you need a place to get out. And so what we're trying to do while we're working with a lot of people on these really big issues, we're trying to look at taking care of assets that you have today, and that's one of them.
Okay, so are there any other questions?
Yes,
You're gonna hope
I'd like
for some
to.
questions.
Hello. I would like to stay on the topic of rural internet, and I'm not an internet expert, but I would like to listen more to the leaders of the state, help us get more traction with something that undoubtedly is important and urgent. And I've been in Nashville for 20 years now, and I have nothing against Nashville. My children were born in Nashville, Tennessee. And what I would like to suggest is to turn the state also as a magnet for something new on rural internet. Right now, you can read in the papers or wherever you read your news, there's this big hoopla about Nashville becoming a magnet to begin testing driverless cars. I have nothing against driverless cars, but I would like to see something done that is brand new in terms of rural internet across the state. And if, for example, and this is just a pie in the sky, if the governor could pick up the phone and call Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and ask him for a couple of his brand new, still testing internet drones that he wants to deploy in third world countries, we could use Tennessee as a pilot testing ground to see if that way of supplying internet access could be tested somewhere. I understand that probably there are 30 different options that technical people can prioritize very efficiently, but on the issue of becoming a magnet, if we can be a magnet for so many things that we need, this could be a fertile testing ground for us to move forward. Thank you.
So what I was saying is, I was going to hope there were going to be lots of questions because I was going to be throwing some more of those curveballs.
I
But
think we answered
let's-
that first one. It's so long-winded.
Yeah.
Everybody's afraid. If they ask another one, they won't get out of here in time.
No, we can go ahead and talk about like what are next steps and how can everyone in this room be involved.
You can go first, but don't steal my Winston Churchill line.
See, but
Still my
No.
Winston Churchill line.
yeah, it's
I'm going to repeat that.
it's better if you go first, and then Jay and I know where to fill in the gaps. See, so that's what.
We know what we can talk about. and what we can't.
Yeah, we know which Winston Churchill line we can use. So that's what.
Fair enough. Yeah, so I actually was talking to somebody, I think within the last 24 hours, and thought, well, this is great work with the Rural Task Force, and it's great that you've created all these ideas. But truth is, this is just the beginning of the ideas. I think we've got some great ideas that we can move forward with now, but this is only the start of a movement. And I'm hopeful that communities will read these reports and think, these guys, they missed the biggest idea yet, and you'll do something on your own. We don't have to wait for a task force. I'm hopeful that it's just something that everybody starts working together. And this is a catalyst to come up with a whole series of other ideas. So my Winston Churchill line is, so this isn't the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but maybe it's the end of the beginning. I think this is just the start of this, what I like to think of as the great Tennessee rural renaissance. And one day people will be looking at Tennessee like they do with the Tennessee Promise and thinking, how did they do that? How do they turn all these bucolic communities into these ideal places to live, like Henderson, like so many of the other places that you guys live now? And it will have started with this group coming together and providing this catalyst for everybody to take action on.
We are the co-chairs. The report that you have is not our report. It's a report from people just like you all. We had the privilege of being named by the governor. These two guys really gave tremendous leadership to the task force, as did my predecessor, Julius Johnson, under Governor Haslam's direction. But as we go forward, as we approach legislators, and I know there are some in here today, and we certainly appreciate their input, and they have been connected throughout this entire process as we have gone through it. There will be things that will require a financial ask. There will be things, as Amy alluded to earlier, that may require statutory change. But we need the input. Don't ever hesitate not to challenge us. But as you read the report, keep in mind that this was from across Tennessee. This report was not driven out of Nashville or the state capitol or Tennessee Tower or Ellington Ag Center. This is from folks across Tennessee. But my commitment to you as we go through the next 2 years is to remain focused on the Governor's Rural Task Force report. That's what we're going to do at agriculture. There are those things, whether it be health initiatives as far as local and fresh foods, ag innovation, ag entrepreneurship, determining what assets agriculture has that can help economic and community development and tourism and education and health and all the other departments function or build on programs that we have. That's what we are committed to. Don't ever hesitate to reach out, just as Randy said, with that new idea that you have. When you look through it, hey, they missed it, let us know. We're open to you, and we'll move forward on your recommendations.
And I think that's tying that in together are two of the most important things. One is there's no way that this was all inclusive, that we missed something, and I say we collectively of the 100 people that were involved. There was an idea I'm sure we missed, there were thoughts we missed, but there are also opportunities that if you all look at that report and say, well, maybe not on a statewide level, but in our community or in our county, we can do this today. Then by all means, don't wait on us or wait on the process. Do it. The other thing is, as Commissioner Boyd said, this is just kind of the end of the beginning. As we present these ideas and they go forward, either the ones that need potential legislation or financing, every year ebbs and flows. So if something doesn't get approved, that doesn't mean that it's dead on the vine. And great ideas are just great ideas if there's not community buy-in, if there's not that support. So if for some reason other ideas or other topics or other needs from a state level get precedence this year, that doesn't mean that these ideas and this time spent over the last year by all of these people who invested, as Jay said, driving from all over the state to Nashville to have these conversations, that doesn't mean it was a waste of time, especially if the support remains for these good ideas. So whatever happens going forward, whatever gets approved or doesn't get approved, doesn't mean that it's over. And then that's where my Winston Churchill quote comes in. He also said, never, never, never give up.
Jay, we're waiting for your Winston Churchill quote.
We're
waiting for your Winston Churchill.
I do not have a Winston Churchill quote.
Do we have any more questions? There's something they said. Yes, sir. Do we have? You can just. I'll repeat your question.
Right. Maybe I'd like to answer that. So Milt's question was, did we hold back? Were there some really big ideas, but we were afraid they were too bold or too expensive? And that was our challenge at the very start, that we wanted to dare mighty things, not be afraid to fail. That's a Roosevelt quote, but we went out with no inhibitions. We told everybody, don't prejudge. Let's let somebody else tell us no. Let's not tell ourselves no. So we think we have some big ideas. Whether they're the biggest ideas yet to come, we don't know. But there was no restrictions, nothing held back.
Okay, that was a Franklin Roosevelt quote, so I'll give you a Theodore Roosevelt.
I don't quote Franklin.
Yeah,
I quote Teddy.
I'll give you a Theodore Roosevelt quote too to go along with that one, because Commissioner Boyd said right in the beginning, in the very beginning, when you talk about processes like this, a lot of times, he even used the example of 30 minutes into another conference he was in, people were looking to point fingers and blaming and things like that. And that never occurred in any of this. The process in this was how do we, what's in front of us and how do we find a way to resolve it? But Teddy Roosevelt, also said that sometimes we have to look in the mirror. That if we could kick in the pants the person most responsible for our challenges and our troubles, we wouldn't sit down for a month. So I'll just let you think about that for a minute. So.
The only presidential quotes that I'm thinking of right now came from Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson, and I'd be fired if I repeated any of them. But I'll share them afterwards.
I love it. Okay, so we have 10 more minutes. Does anyone want to talk about the leadership? We talked about like what the stakeholders in here, or what they could be doing, but is there anything at a local level that they could be especially doing? I may be putting in a teaser for my JECDB thing, but is there anything at the local level that our leaders could be doing in the meantime before some of the recommendations come out?
Well, one, I think, and Kevin mentioned this, but there's the opportunity when this any legislation comes out to support the rural task force initiatives. So call your legislators, rally the troops. If somebody promotes some of these ideas, make sure that you're standing with them and supporting them. The good news, by the way, though, and we don't want to ever take anything for granted, but the good news last year we had the Rural Economic Opportunity Act bill put forward, and in the Senate it passed 31-0, and in the House 97-0. So I think we've got a lot of buy-in from our legislature. So I don't think it's a big challenge, but let's not take anything for granted. And I think also was mentioned, there's a lot of things we could do now. I mentioned that work-based learning idea, a $25,000 grant. You may not get the grant. There's only going to be 40 grants given out. And by the time we're actually giving out the grants, it'll be a year from now. Why wait? If you can find a way to do it on the cheap, maybe it doesn't cost you $25,000, but to create some way to create more opportunities for young kids in your community to get apprenticeships and internships working with certain businesses, you could do that now. So read the report, look through some of those ideas and think, yeah, I get that this is a big deal statewide, but in our town, we can do it now. And so look for some of those opportunities to just act now.
Thank you. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead and head to break early.
Thank you all for what you do.
Dr.
Thank
Young
y'all.
has one here. Yes, sir. Here's the microphone for you, Doctor.
Some 35 years ago, I served as an associate warden to a prison in Tiptonville. 85% of our prisoners back then were in there because of drugs. Today, we still have about 85% in jail, I suspect, because of drugs, but there's about 3 times as many. In most of our rural counties, our jails are full. I know I live in Clay County, and we're trying to build a new jail, a 100-bed jail in a county with 8,000 people. And our jail has been full. We're farming our prisoners out to other counties, and the only program we have for these young men particularly would be picking up trash on the side of the road. We're losing them. And we have them captured in our jails. Would somebody be looking at something we could do with those guys while we have them in jail to help them get off drugs and to help them become more productive members of society?
Yeah, great. Thank you for asking that question. So, by the way, I just got out of jail on Tuesday. I went to one of our nearby jails with our commissioner, Tony Parker. And the reason why I went to jail, actually went to prison, state prison, was to look at a work program that they had. At that prison, there are 220 people working at a factory making some really cool 8-foot plyboard, but it's a kind of a special wood that you can't get anyplace else in North America. They're learning skills, they're getting paid well, they have pride in what they do, and when they get out, they'll have a work ethic and a skill that they can get some jobs in. We've got several of those, I think 14 of those programs across the state. We need to do more of them. Challenge. A lot of the reasons why they're not doing more is the inmates have some social issues and a lot of time drug issues that is not allowing them to be able to participate in that program. But that's something that we can hopefully increase. One of the things in our task force recommendations is a small amount of funds that will go through the Department of Labor to help support a recidivism program to help reduce recidivism. They've already tested this out in Greene County. It's a program where some of the inmates there get to go on work release over to a factory and work and get skills. I went over and visited them. So it was incredibly emotional stories. This young man who obviously had made a lot of bad choices now has a truck that he owns. He can drive himself to work and back. And he's still going to be in prison or jail for another 4 years. But when he gets out, he's got a job, he's got a skill, and hopefully he'll have a better life and never come back to jail. And so it's a great question. And we've got some initiatives around it, but we need to do more.
Right.
Commissioners, welcome. Mike Bell. How are y'all this morning?
Morning, sir.
Good.
This is
I've
our
got
boss,
a question.
Mr. Bell.
I've got a question, and this is something that Commissioner Triplett and I have spoken about before. We have an economic engine in this state that I've seen on the low side generates about 2.2 to on the high side about $4 billion a year, and that's outdoor activities: hunting, fishing, water sports, hiking, bird watching. And this is an activity that pretty much goes on without a lot of state activity to stimulate it. But I think it's an engine that could create even more economic opportunity in the state. And what coordinated effort are your three departments making to further promote the outdoor activities that touch every rural community in this state, be it rafting or tubing on the Wolf River, the crappie fishing on Reelfoot Lake. It could be bird watching in Radnor Lake. Just any number of activities that go on in the state. What coordinated effort are the departments making to further promote this activity?
Well, from a coordinated standpoint, we're working together actually on an issue down your way to try to help work out the future of rafting on the Ocoee. But also from a tourism standpoint, and especially as we're talking rural, at least 54, there may be as many as 56, but at least 54 of our 95 counties, the number one tourism asset in those counties, and actually in many of those, the number one economic asset, not just tourism asset, but economic driver in those counties are the great outdoors. State parks, lakes, rivers, and so just in the last 8 months, as a tourism department, we have signed a partnership with Bassmasters. We have signed a partnership with Bass Pro. We have recommitted almost $300,000 interdepartmentally of our marketing budget to promoting the outdoors. Aside from our new partnership with Bassmasters and Bass Pro, we're meeting with TWRA to talk about ways to market the assets that already exist. So that's just been probably within the last 8 months from a tourism standpoint.
I'll say my wife questions why I spend so much time with this Triplet guy. She's always saying, who is he again? But we spend a lot of time together and work on a lot of different projects. The Ocoee River Project is one of them in the rafting area, but there's been a lot. The websites that we talked about yesterday in the opening session, our department, working with tourism, created some great websites for our rural communities to promote their assets, and many of which were those outdoor activities. We worked with Hardeman County. We're talking to them now about possibility of creating a lake. There's a whole series of things that, I'm looking at my time, we've got 18 seconds. There's a whole series of things that we're doing together to address that. And
one of the infrastructure grants went toward Hardeman County for a project on the Hatchie. You heard me mention Hickman County and the Duck River. The outdoors is, especially in our rural areas, our most underdeveloped natural asset. And so it's a focus of ours without question.
And that's just my concern and what I wanted to hear, that it's going to remain a focus, and it's going to be something that we're going to actively promote in Tennessee.
We just cut 5 new 15-second commercials specifically toward the outdoors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all so much for everything you do too. You have 3 of the, there's so many commissioners in here, so I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but 3 of some of the most committed, tireless commissioners in state government working for rural Tennessee and with so many of their colleagues in other departments. So thank you all so much for all you do and your leadership and for investing in your team and our stakeholders.